Hello, everybody. How are you? How are you doing? Everything fine? How was the conference until now? Did you enjoy it? So I'm head of the board of this initiative here. So in English it is Initiative News Enlightenment. In German we call it Initiative Nachrichtenaufklärung. And our partner organization in the USA is Project Censored. We want to introduce to you those both of our associations, and we want to explain what we are doing. So we are, let's say, media watchdogs. We do media criticism in a very systematic and also scientific way. And now I pass to Steve, who came from Chicago just to join this conference and to tell you something about Project Censored.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. My first time speaking at Republica. So Project Censored is an American media monitoring organization that was founded in 1976. So we're coming up on our 50th anniversary, and our mission is to identify underreported, ignored, or censored news stories, to draw attention to those news stories. And the way that we do that is every year we enlist a group of students from around the United States, about 200 students working with faculty at 12 to 14 colleges and universities. They, throughout the year, identify stories they believe have not received the attention that they deserve. They research them. They research how much mainstream news media coverage those stories have received, and then they nominate them for our annual list. And every year we release a list of the top 25 most important underreported or ignored news stories of the year. We release it as part of a book that comes with other essays of media criticism and so on. Hector is going to talk to you, and so our effort, which has been going on for 50 years, was sort of the inspiration for what's happening here in Germany with INA, and Hector will talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we are doing more or less the same in Germany, but we are just younger. Our legendary founder was Professor Peter Ludes from the University of Siegen in North Rhine-Westphalia, and he once had a research program in the US, and there he met the guys and the colleagues from Project Censored, and he thought that we need something like this, an organization like this in Germany as well. And so now 30 years ago, in the 90s, end of 90s, he founded our initiative News Enlightenment. We do more or less the same, as USA is much bigger than Germany. We don't have 25, but we have 10 issues, 10 topics we publish every year. We collaborate with a lot of universities in Germany and also in Austria, and there are student research groups who do all the investigations for our top 10 list of neglected news. We call them in Germany top 10 der vergessenen Nachrichten, so for the top 10 of forgotten news. And we have a media partner, and this media partner is the biggest published radio station in Germany, the biggest national public radio station, that is Deutschlandfunk. And they help us to publish, to find an audience for topics that we identified to be censored or to be neglected in, let's say, mainstream or legacy media. The main difference between Project Censored and our initiative maybe is that we do original research. So we look for stories, we look for people who tell us their stories. We don't specialize and we don't emphasize in alternative media as you do. And I guess also Project Censored is a little bit more left-wing as we try to be objective and, let's say, politically neutral in what we are doing. That doesn't work always fine, but at least we try to. And now maybe we want to have a look in our lists and tell you something about the issues, about the topics we identified as neglected in our media systems.
Certainly, and let me just add one comment. It is true that the method that we use for identifying stories is somewhat different. So for Project Censored, to be eligible to be on our list, the story has to have been reported by an independent or alternative news source, usually online news organizations, and often news outlets, and often, as Hector says, very left-wing, although sometimes we get stories from right-wing or conservative media as well that make it onto our list. Also, it's after the students research the stories and nominate them, they are submitted to an international jury of judges. I think you do the same thing at INA, and that international jury that includes judges from Japan, from Germany, from UK and the US, then votes on the stories and then ranks them. So I'll give you a couple of examples of stories that made it, and if you click on the resources, and the top 25 archive, I'll give you a couple of examples of stories that we have identified as underreported from this past year. We released our list in December of 2024, and the number one story was the astounding number of people in the United States killed or injured on the job. This year, 6,000 people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States, died on the job, which is a 10-year high. It's the highest it has been since 2015. And moreover, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the people most likely to be victimized, to be injured or killed on the job, are people of color, that is African American or Latino. And we, as part of our research for that particular story, we also looked at a survey that was done by the international, by the Center for Organizing, that found that 87% of service sector workers in the American South, who tend to be overwhelmingly African American and Latino, 87% had been injured on the job within the past year. Now, you would think this would be huge news and would get covered by lots of television stations, mainstream daily newspapers, but instead we found that no national news media had covered that story, even though it was based on a report released by the U.S. government's Department of Bureau of Labor Statistics. Only independent news media and small local television stations ran stories based on that information. So that's one example of the kinds of stories that we think get overlooked by the mainstream media.
So one more difference is the jury, because we don't have an international but a national jury, and this jury consists out of journalists, German journalists, and scientists as well from the universities we are collaborating with. And we don't do it, I think you do it online, right? And we do kind of a jury conference once a year. We invite all of them to Cologne. So our initiative is located in the city of Cologne, because Cologne is, maybe together with Berlin, one of the media capitals in Germany, with the biggest TV broadcast companies and so on. And so we discuss a whole day. At the end of the day, we do a voting, and then out of maybe 30 or 50 topics, we vote for our top 10 of forgotten news or neglected news. And I can just show you a couple of them from our actual list we published only last month. And for a couple of years now, we publish it also in English in a research journal that is called Journalism Research. It is a German and English-speaking research journal. And here are our topics. First one, for example, is that child soldiers fighting with German small caliber weapons. Yeah? Germany is one of the biggest producers of small caliber, how do you say? Caliber, the small caliber weapons, yeah, and they sell it through all over the world. Yeah, it's one of the biggest successes economically for our weapon industry, and especially those small caliber weapons are fit very well for children because they are light. Yeah, they don't have that much weight, yeah, and so even small children can handle them, and there is no official or political control on this thing. Next one is a refugee camp on Samos. It became very famous 2 or 3 years ago because there was a big campfire, yeah, and then the EU promised that they will fix it and they will do kind of a refugee paradise out of it. And a German Protestant priest went there, and he figured out that the conditions and circumstances there are even worse. It's really kind of a concentration camp, yeah? And people are starving there, and they live in very, very bad conditions. And our mainstream media didn't report about this at all. They didn't cover this story. Some more examples. So, wait a moment, sorry. So here we are. So. Yeah, a ban on human rights organization in Ethiopia, homeless despite having a job, social problem here in Germany, yeah, or educational equality for children in foster care, yeah. Morbus Mediterraneus, so a medical topic that people who come from abroad or immigrants aren't treated well in our polyclinics and hospitals and so on, because German doctors just don't identify people from foreign countries have in their health conditions. And so on. What you easily can identify is that a lot of topics of our German list are international or maybe global topics or issues, and also we identified this. And maybe the reason for this is that today we are living in a global or transnational media system, and our media companies just work globally because we have a World Wide Web and we have broadcast companies who are working internationally and working in foreign countries, and so we more and more try to identify censored or neglected news all over the world. And that's why we, a couple of years ago, started together with Project Censored kind of a joint venture, and we now try to do a global list of neglected news with a really international jury with experts from all over the world. And Steve maybe may explain a little bit what we are going to do there.
So, as Hector said, this is a joint venture. It's called International News Neglect. It is a joint venture of Project Censored and INA. And the idea is that we have created a jury, I think, of about 25 individuals from around the world, although there's a concentration of Germans and a concentration of Americans because we're the two organizations behind it. And the members of the jury can nominate stories for consideration for the international list, and then those stories are voted on, and we come up with a list of top 5 stories internationally that have been overlooked and neglected. We did this 2 years ago and released a list. Do you have that link on the page? We released it 2 years ago, I believe at the Deutsche Welle Global Media Forum. It was released. So here is the here's the list from 2 years ago. We are currently in the process of assembling or taking nominations for stories for consideration for this upcoming year's list of international news stories. And let me just share a couple that I know have been nominated by people associated with Project Censored or judges that we recruited. So one of the stories that is going to be voted on is a story that I think should have a lot more attention, which is that the UNICEF, the UN agency that is devoted to child welfare, has determined that hundreds of millions of children are at risk for lack of potable water because of climate change. 350 million children in South Asia alone, in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc., are at risk of dying of thirst because they don't have access to water, and it is due to climate change. And this is something that was released in a report that was issued by UNICEF, not a kind of fringe radical organization. And yet, in the United States, it received no corporate or mainstream media coverage at all. It got some coverage, and Al Jazeera ran a report about it. The Vatican News ran a report about it. But none of our corporate media had anything to say about this astounding story. I think it will get a lot of votes. I don't know, Hector, if you want to say anything more about some of the stories that have been nominated.
Yeah, what we can see, what we can learn is that German media cover only stories or topics from countries where German journalists are. And for example, the whole African continent is just not covered in German media. It's a censored continent. Yeah. For example, the ARD, our biggest public TV channel, has 4 stations in Africa for the whole continent. Yeah. One is in Egypt, one is in South Africa, one is in Kenya. Yeah. The one in South Africa is in Johannesburg, and he's only covering topics from South Africa. So from the state South Africa. The one in Egypt is mostly covering Gaza and Palestine and Jordania. Yeah, so he's not covering Africa at all. So the one journalist sitting or located in Kenya, in Nairobi, is covering more or less the whole continent. Just one studio, one journalist, or maybe a couple of journalists. Yeah, and that's far too little. And that's why topics and issues from Africa just don't come and aren't covered in our media. We don't only figure out those topics in the research workshops with our students, but we also do scientific research on it, because we want to figure out what are the mechanisms, how media work, and why some stories are covered very much and others are neglected totally. And one result of this research is a book we did last year, and the name, it has already an English title. It is called Agenda Cutting, because that is the mechanism we identified as the biggest problem in our mainstream media. They have an agenda, yeah, and agenda setting is one of the best known concepts in communication science, let's say. But there is the other side of the coin is agenda cutting. That is really an intentional process to censor stories and to put them out of the media system. And we are now doing, with help of Steve and of Project Censored, we are now doing an English translation of this book, because it's so important to discuss and to debate and to argue on this concept, but because you only can learn how media function if you understand what agenda cutting is and how journalists in the newsrooms are selecting news and selecting or deselecting their topics and their issues and their subjects they are covering. Yeah. And now we maybe wanted to discuss with you whether you have ideas, whether you have maybe some issues you identified as very important, as relevant for the society, but not covered, according to your opinion, not covered in our media. Do you have an idea about some issues, national or international issues? This lady there.
Please remove your headphones, otherwise you hear yourself double.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It's not really a topic I feel is underrepresented. It's more of a question. You talked about agenda setting, you talked about agenda cutting, but apart from these kind of huge phenomenon, have you found patterns over the last, 50, 30 years, because with the top 10, top 25 every year, is it just agenda cutting because we don't have time to talk about everything, or do you have other patterns identified?
That is a fantastic question. And I will just say, so Project Censored has been doing this for 50 years. For 50 years, we have selected 25 stories. So we have about 1,200 stories that give us a longitudinal picture of the gaps and omissions and the patterns of omissions in the corporate news media. And I can just say, so we focus mainly on the American media system, but in the American media system, stories about the environment are systematically overlooked, and about environmental degradation. I have some theories about why that is, but for the past 50 years, stories about environment have been neglected, although I think recently the legacy media has done a better job of covering the environment. Stories about workers' rights have been, in the United States, systematically ignored by the corporate or mainstream media. I think it's better in Germany, in Europe, where you have public service media like Deutsche Rundfunk and others, right? We don't have true public service media in the United States. I believe that I could go through a list of topics. It's also the case in the United States that Africa, the entire continent of Africa, is a blind spot for the corporate media, and amazingly, also South America. The New York Times, Hector was just saying the public television here has 3 stations in Africa. The New York Times now, it used to have more reporters assigned to the entire continent of South America, now has 1 reporter permanently assigned to South America, who travels from country to country. And in the week they're in Colombia, you will get stories about Colombia. In the week that reporter is in Brazil, you will get stories about Brazil. When that reporter moves to Argentina, you'll get stories about Argentina. But they have cut back. Our big newspapers have cut reporting staffs so dramatically that they have 1 person permanently assigned. Of course, if there's a big breaking story or there's an election, they'll send some parachute reporters in to cover it. But they have 1 permanently assigned reporter. That's a scandal. So those are some of the gaps, and I'm sure Hector has some other ideas.
So we ask the German population, we ask society to propose to us issues or topics that people think are neglected in our news. And one kind of proposal comes every year, and that is from people out of, let's say, closed shops, like jailhouses, imprisoned people, also hospitals and so care shops and so on. And that is easy to explain because the investigation of these stories is just hard and expensive for a media corporation, because it takes a lot of time. You have the permission. You have to ask for permission to the director of this house, and they normally won't give it to you. So it takes a lot of time to do the research, and time is money. And our news corporations don't have money anymore, and so they just let it out. They censor these stories, and so those people who are maybe ill, maybe they just feel to be so I don't know, under bad conditions in any way. So they write us letters, and we got a lot of phone calls. We switched off our fax only a couple of years ago. We got handwritten letters. It's really goes to my heart. Because it's really so warm, and they just cry for help, and media aren't interested in these issues. A lot of social questions are not covered at all. One explanation can be that journalists who are specialized in economics are mainly interested in entrepreneurship and big corporations and so on, but they are not interested in the problems of people in their everyday life. They just don't cover this. And that's maybe due to their education, or maybe due to the journalism and the media system. And so we try to bring those stories in the public. Yes. Please.
Yeah, so having worked for the American media since 2006, and working in more corporate settings, like I was an editor at Wired, I think the common thread of like the stories that are getting cut has to do with the business models that are supporting the media organizations and any kind of real or perceived conflict that can occur between the stories that are being published and the funders of those business models, like advertisers. And so it might not be the case that journalists don't want to cover certain stories, but when they're entering into conflict between the publishers of those media institutions that have their own reasons for clamping down on certain stories, it's like the journalists that are the most provocative that have their necks on the chopping block when the budgets are cut, and it's this cycle of
Yes.
budget cuts, then all of the journalists with ethics get pushed out, and then the only ones that are left are like the yes men that will just write the stories that the publishers want.
I couldn't agree more, and I think you're right to point to the business model of the commercial advertising supported media. So Project Censored over the past 20 years has identified a number of stories about plastics pollution, about the use of plastic bottles and the damage that it does to the environment and to the human health. There's a reason why corporate media don't want to cover that story. Because if you look at the advertisers, it's Coke, it's Pepsi, it is all these companies that depend, right, on selling beverages contained in plastic bottles. Now, I am certain that no editor or producer told the journalist, don't whatever you do, don't cover this. It's going to offend one of our major advertisers. They just know. They internalize it. And I think the business model of the corporate news media also is to blame for why we, in the United States, do not get better international news. Because as they face more competition from digital news outlets, and as the bottom line has gotten tight, there's been a lot of belt tightening, there's more austerity in newsrooms, they have to cut what is expensive. Well, what's expensive is to cover stories in Rwanda, right? Or stories in the backwoods outside of the major cities in Brazil. That's very expensive to do. And investigative journalism is also expensive to do because you don't know if there will be any payoff at the end of paying for a reporter to spend 3 months looking into a story. So I think that just the business model alone explains these gaps. Yeah.
So we are at the end already. Thank you for following our presentation. You can get in contact with us via email. Just visit our website, that is projectcensored.org, I guess, or it is in German, it is derblindefleck.de, yeah, or maybe nachrichtenaufklärung.de. So we need an English URL for our website as well. Yeah. So we have to work on it. We have to improve our organization. Thank you for being here, and thank you for getting in touch with us. Yeah, and enjoy the conference. Thank you.